Good evening, Fiji, and welcome to For the Record. Well, tonight we have something different for you. Last night we had the 4th Fiji Music Awards, and we were grateful to have a special guest with us that evening that I thought what he had to share last night was just interesting enough to share with you again this evening. Yes, we have the head of the Copyright Enforcement Unit for the Fiji Intellectual Property Office, Mr. Terence O'Neill-Joyce. A very good evening to you.
Good evening to you.
Thank you very much, Terence, for joining us. Now, tell us, how long have you been with this unit?
I've been 3 years, but just a little bit before that I was contracted by AMCOS to help Fiji Performing Rights Association because they had some real concerns about protecting their members. I mean, they've got about 500 members of FIPRA, and many of them have some difficulty when the recordings are made to get out in the marketplace. They get played on the radio, they may get some exposure on Fiji Broadcasting Limited television, and so I came in and I started to do what I could, but I quickly saw that there was a problem, and that's why I'm still here.
Now, you've been involved with the Fiji music industry for some time.
Yep, goes back to 1972 when I got in an open rowing boat, went across from Nasuri out to Tombarua Island, and recorded a live album with Timothy Godaki. And he was a fun guy. I never heard anybody sing falsetto as well as he did, writing songs. And it was a really funny occasion because we recorded live while people were dancing and he was playing. And I enjoyed myself so much. I probably had a little bit too much to drink, and I just left everything running.
Okay.
And checked the tape afterwards, and it was fine. Released it on a CD.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, well, how was the recording industry in 1972 in Fiji? How developed was it?
Well, it was, I mean, there were people like Jim Sears, I remember. There were people that came in from the outside to record music because they saw a potential for tourism. So some of the early recordings of Fijian groups were made primarily to sell to tourists. And
not to the locals?
No. Nobody thought about what the locals might like. And one of the first people I met here was a guy called Peniasi Ravutia, unfortunately since passed away. Now, he was a senior program officer. One of the things he said to me, you know, there is a gap. And so I said, well, you're right where it happens. Why don't we do something about it? So we started progressively to go around different villages, record, FMF, Royal Fiji Police Band as it was then, Ganavau Group, Vunimono Village Choir, Rosi Ni Malaka, Bua Ni Lo Mai Nambua, and then a really great album that I still like was with Apakuki Mate, and he, you know, great guitarist, a lot of instrumentals, and I felt, why not take this back to New Zealand and get it arranged, get a symphonic arrangement done to it? So it's probably the first album that was recorded in Fiji that had strings. So we used members of the NZSO in Wellington.
Wow.
And then when that came back here, FBC, just before the news every morning, they would play that. That would be the opening music of the day.
Okay.
Don't know whether they still do it, but I'm sure you've still got it in the library. So all those recordings then finished up on compact disc, became a completely different market. And there's so much that you could talk about the local music situation, and the two founding members, the people that laid the foundation to the local music in Fiji were primarily, the first person would have been Ravindra Patel. And then Mohammed Akif with Procera, and I think he bought Procera from Ashok Nasi, and in those days he was duplicating cassettes.
Okay. Now, what was the response like when we first approached village choirs and all these from those artists? Were they eager to record, and did they understand what it meant?
Well, it wasn't so much an eagerness, it was like a privilege that somebody was taking enough interest in them. And what I loved about going into the Fiji villages was there's an established protocol. And a sort of Kaivalangi sort of coming in there and, you know, acting the big record producer from outside the country, was an absolute waste of time. It was a question of getting down, trying to sit cross-legged, which is difficult for me, drinking Yangona, Talanoa, and just really lovely atmosphere. And I've always found with all the recordings, and I've done probably about 1,000 LPs in my recording life, is that the role of the record producer is not to change anything but to set conditions so that everybody feels comfortable and happy.
Now, what made you come to Fiji to do this?
Well, I met this guy in Wellington called Colin Raddock, who was a friend of Matt Samuels, who had some rugby playing prowess. And, well, he was the first person. Actually did an album in New Zealand called Discful of Sunshine for intellectually handicapped children. And I used him. He had quite a nice voice. A perfect voice for children. I even sang on the album too.
Really?
I do not have the perfect voice for children.
Well, I'm sure it'll be quite interesting to listen to now.
Oh, it's on iTunes.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
Okay.
Don't go looking for it.
Now, speaking of which, from then, we jump to today about how the response to protecting the rights of the Fiji musicians.
Well, we've got a huge learning process to undergo. And it's not just the artists themselves. I mean, the artists know now that if they get popular, the chances are, in a very short space of time, there are going to be pirated CDs in the shop. Now, if you take the example of either SPR, MTM, Procera, they're going to have to pay the artists, and they, you know, sometimes in the early days it was up to double figures. So someone like Sarah would probably get $10,000–$13,000, and then Mohammed would have to work the release in such a way that at least he got that money back. I mean, a person invests, they've got to at least get some money back so they can reinvest in something else. And what started to happen was that in Fiji you had video libraries.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut you short because we've just run out of time for this particular segment. Getting very interesting. Stay with us. We will continue with talking music and the Fiji music industry right here on For the Record. Welcome back to For the Record.